Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Al-Shifa in ruins. Israeli forces leave Gaza's biggest hospital after a 2-week siege, with much of the complex destroyed. Israel's Prime Minister is under mounting pressure to resign as protesters seek the immediate release of hostages. The biggest setback in 2 decades of power for Turkey's President Erdogan as the country's opposition makes historic gains in local elections. And China's top officials hold talks with France's foreign minister in Beijing. Gaza's Al-Shifa medical complex, once the Palestinian enclave's largest hospital, is now in ruins after the withdrawal of the Israeli military. Israeli troops have been carrying out a 2-week raid on the complex, claiming Hamas fighters were using it. Israel says its operation at Al-Shifa was one of the most successful in its near 6-month-long conflict in Gaza, with hundreds of Hamas militants killed or captured and weapons and cash seized. The World Health Organization says 21 patients have died since Israel began its siege of the hospital on the 18th of March. In a tweet, the Director General of the United Nations health body said hostilities near the complex are continuing. Tedros Ghebreyesus urged Israel to facilitate a humanitarian corridor, repeating the call for a ceasefire. In a separate attack in Gaza, at least 4 people have now been killed in an Israeli airstrike near Al-Aqsa Hospital. Palestinian officials say the strike hit a tent where displaced people were sheltering and journalists were working. But Israel's military claims it targeted a command center operated by the Palestinian armed group Islamic Jihad. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Akram Al-Satari, who's in the city of Rafah. Akram, what's the situation like now around the Al-Shifa hospital?
Well, a humanitarian catastrophe that has been unfolding ever since the Israeli occupation forces withdrew from the area. People rushed to the area. People were seeing and assessing the devastation that has been caused to the entire medical complex, the largest medical complex in Gaza. Some special statements were made by the representative of the Palestinian government office and also Palestinian Minister of Health. And in those statements, they were highlighting what is the success that has been achieved by the Israeli occupation forces. According to the Palestinian sources, 800 medical beds were destroyed, 100 dialysis machines were also destroyed, and around 1/3 of the therapeutic services capacity in Gaza Strip was also wasted due to the ongoing siege that was imposed on Al-Shifa hospital. People who were civilians were there, were searching for the bodies of their dears, were trying to find if anyone they knew or anyone of their dears and relative was staying alive. They saw horrors and they were describing, and they were not only describing, they were taking some footage and posting that footage online. The footage that is being circulated is extremely disturbing and shocking. It shows people who were run over by the Israeli tanks. It shows people who were burned and unearthed, around 300 bodies. It shows all different departments of Al-Shifa hospital totally burned by the Israeli occupation forces. It shows people who were tied and killed and now their bodies were decomposing. It shows horrors that the people inside Al-Shifa lived for around 13 days, and people all around Gaza were living for such a period of time that is 6 months now.
And what more do we know about the attack at a different hospital, the Al-Aqsa hospital?
Al-Aqsa hospital was targeted. The area that hosts the Palestinian journalists and also internally displaced people was targeted. The area, the vicinity of Al-Aqsa hospital was subjected to different attacks and different targets along the 6 months, but this attack is the closest where it hit the inside of the Al-Aqsa hospital. And in that inside, there were the Palestinian journalists whom we know. Some of them are our close friends. Some of them are just colleagues whom we were getting in touch with, saying good morning, good afternoon, how are you doing, and how are you surviving? At least 2 were killed, and 30 others were injured. The Israeli sources say that they have targeted a command for the Islamic Jihad, but according to our experience, and we cannot judge the situation, the people that were targeted are internally displaced people and journalists who were working from that area and who were reporting to local and international news outlets. Some of them are still hospitalized because of their wounds, and at least 2 of them were killed.
Akram, thank you for that. Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari in the city of Rafah. Well, protesters in Israel have called on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to resign as discontent mounts over the fate of nearly 130 Israeli hostages still held in Gaza. Netanyahu, the country's longest-serving prime minister, has seen his popularity plummet since Hamas militants attacked Israel on the 7th of October, killing more than 1,100 people and abducting 253 hostages. Protesters fear the remaining hostages will die if the operation in Gaza continues and are calling for elections.
It's clear personal interests are leading the Prime Minister and affecting his decision-making. It's time he and the government work for all the people, to bring back the hostages, to build a better future for all of us, to fix the relationship with the United States and the world. It's unbelievable the damage that has been done in the last 6 months since the horrific October the 7th massacre. The current government is just taking us down.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Alex Cadier in Tel Aviv. Alex, more pressure then on Benjamin Netanyahu. What's the picture from your side? What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Well, a lot of pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, Jamie. We saw the biggest protests in Israel, anti-government protests, since the atrocities of October 7th and since the start of this war. There is increased pressure because we're starting to see the families of those hostages still being held in atrocious conditions in Gaza. Those families are now joining the anti-government protesters in their efforts against Prime Minister Netanyahu. We heard from the mother of a 24-year-old man being held in Gaza who said that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been consistently torpedoing any deal for the release of the hostages. Her words is that he was an obstacle to their loved ones returning home, and we're seeing that pressure building. Big protest here in Tel Aviv on Saturday evening, and then a 4-day protest, a tent city being built next to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament in Jerusalem, putting more pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to reach this deal. Now, we know that there is a lot of international pressure, but this shows a shift in domestic Israeli public opinion when it comes to Prime Minister Netanyahu's handling of these particular negotiations. Now, to be clear, Jamie, that does not mean opposition to this war. That does not mean there is a majority of Israelis who want the end of the war. What they do want is a temporary ceasefire to release those hostages.
Now, we understand that the United States and Israel are holding a meeting over the Rafah military operation. What more do we know about that?
Well, just the organization of this meeting, Jamie, has been tense, has been tricky. Originally, it was supposed to be in person last week in Washington, D.C. That was cancelled by Prime Minister Netanyahu after the UN Security Council resolution was allowed to pass by the U.S., not vetoing it. The following day, we understand that the Prime Minister's office privately asked to reschedule those meetings, but when that was made public, he denied it. And so you had this back and forth with the U.S. and Israel just to get these talks going. Once they agreed on a virtual meeting, the dividing line clearly is what to do in Rafah, and the Israelis are very clear. They will go into Rafah, they will quote, finish the job. There are 4 battalions of Hamas fighters, they say, in Rafah, but the United States says without a clear plan to prevent civilian casualties and mass casualty events, an operation in Rafah would be a mistake and should not happen. So we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu just yesterday. He said no amount of international pressure, no amount of US pressure would stop Israel going into Rafah. The US says they shouldn't, Israel says they will. Now they're talking. Quite a tense discussion ahead.
Alex, thank you for that. Our correspondent Alex Cadier in Tel Aviv. Turkey's main opposition party has dealt a huge blow to President Erdogan in local elections. 5 of the country's biggest cities are now controlled by the secular Republicans, who also made gains in areas formerly loyal to Erdogan's ruling AK party. Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu is now a strong favourite to stand for the presidency in 2028.
Sevgili yurttaşlarım,
My dear citizens, you have opened the door to a new future today. Starting tomorrow, Turkey will be a different Turkey. You have given the opportunity to take the first step towards a Turkey where democracy, freedom, equality, rationality, science, love and solidarity thrive.
Well, conceding defeat, President Erdogan said his party would respect this result and take time to reflect on the outcome.
Ekonomideki sıkıntılarımızın giderilmesi başta olmak üzere.
We will focus more on the urgent issues of our country, especially the revival of the earthquake zone and solving our economic problems. Until today, we have determinedly implemented our medium-term programme and 12th development plan, which are our roadmap in the economy.
Well, Umut Korkut is Professor of International Politics at Glasgow Caledonian University. Professor, good to see you. Thanks very much for your time. Where did it all go so wrong for President Erdogan?
Good to see you again, Jamie. I don't think that President Erdogan was expecting this result, but I don't think that the opposition was expecting this result either. I think the President Erdogan concentrated on winning Istanbul because, as you have guessed, it was the biggest boon for AKP. However, they could not really control the voters' preferences, and then the voters, they seem to have veered away from AKP tremendously.
When it comes to elections around the world, someone famously once said, it's the economy, stupid. Was that the story in Turkey?
Most definitely. However, I don't think that the economy is the only explanation. 9 months ago, actually, in a situation where the economy was not too different, Erdogan still pulled the gain. This time around, the opposition seems to have found much better candidates to run. It's also the fact that the Turkish population, as well as other voters around the world, I think they started to understand that local elections, they really matter if they cannot really dent the power of the power holders that occupy the presidency or the executive.
I mean, it's worth reinforcing, of course, these are local elections. Can we extrapolate these results onto national elections and assume that Turkey really is set on a new post-Erdogan course?
I think it is starting already. There are another 4 years of 4 years until the next presidential elections or the parliamentary elections. However, for the first time since 1977, Republican People's Party, the secular party, is the biggest party in Turkey. This is a significant gain. It will also start to show that the Republican People's Party can control, big cities, small cities, Anatolian cities, even faraway cities in Turkey's east, and then they will start to show that an alternative is possible. Actually, last night, if you compare the victory speech of Republican People's Party and then the balcony speech of Erdogan, which had been his traditional, you could really see the difference. That at the moment, Erdogan started to represent the old Turkey that he always wanted to fight against, whereas the Republican People's Party is now representing new Turkey.
Turkey's problems are deep-seated, though, aren't they? I mean, will this new change in the political landscape really fix things without some very difficult choices?
I'm not in the short run, definitely not, because ultimately there's a presidential system. AKP is pretty much in charge of the executive, and there's not much you can do in terms of controlling the local governments, etc. However, this will start to signify that there could be an alternative, and then this may actually boost the visibility of Republican People's Party. And even if they have 4 more years to go, it may present them as an alternative for a much wider populace.
Professor, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on the programme again. Umut Korkut, Professor of International Politics at Glasgow Caledonian University. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, lighting up Germany. Cannabis users celebrate a change in the law decriminalising marijuana. But there are limits. Next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? and unicorn companies. Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Israeli forces leave Gaza's biggest hospital after a 2-week siege, with much of the Al-Shifa complex destroyed. Our other headlines: Israel's Prime Minister is under mounting pressure to resign as protesters seek the immediate release of hostages. And the biggest setback in 2 decades of power for Turkey's President Erdogan as the country's opposition makes historic gains in local elections. President Xi Jinping says China is ready to deepen cooperation with Indonesia in a meeting with Indonesian President-elect Prabowo Subianto. President Xi said Beijing is willing to push forward regional economic projects between the two countries. Both leaders emphasized the need to enhance trade, maritime cooperation and sustainable development. Well, China and France have reaffirmed their commitment to strengthening their strategic partnership. This comes as Premier Li Qiang hosted French Foreign Minister Stéphane Séjourné in the capital, Beijing. Séjourné also held talks with his Chinese counterpart, Wang Yi, where the two sides stressed new opportunities for collaboration. Séjourné said France expects China to send clear messages to Russia over the conflict in Ukraine. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Yo Yang, now in Beijing. Yo Yang, what more do we know about these talks?
Well, French Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs Stéphane Séjourné has been in Beijing on Monday. This is Séjourné's first visit to China since took office this January. He had quite a busy schedule in his one-day trip. This afternoon, China's Premier Li Qiang held talks with him as this year marks the 60th anniversary of the establishment of China-France ties. Li Qiang said that China stands ready to work together with France to further promote bilateral ties in various fields. Séjourné responded that bilateral ties have seen great achievements over the past 6 decades, and France hopes to work with China to enhance economic and cultural cooperation. At the same time, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi also held talks with the French Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs Stéphane Séjourné on Monday, and the two jointly met the media and taken questions from outlets from both sides. Actually, Wang Yi said China is actively developing the new quality productive forces and continuously promoting high-quality opening up, which will bring more opportunities for both France and other countries around the world to carry out cooperation with China. And for his part, Séjourné responded that France stands against the so-called decoupling from China and would like to enhance cooperation with Beijing in the fields of trade, agriculture, green development, artificial intelligence and culture. Well, when responding to some EU politicians' remarks about decoupling from China, Wang Yi stressed that cooperation is the main tone of China-Europe relations. And he said he believes the common interests of both sides are far outweigh differences. He added that China is an opportunity for Europe, not a risk, and China is a partner for the continent rather than an opponent. Well, the French Foreign Minister also spoke at the opening ceremony of the 18th China-France Cultural Spring. Well, the event's featuring a wide range of activities. It will serve as a platform to show the achievements in cultural exchanges between the two sides. And the first event is the Palace of Versailles and the Forbidden City, where it's an exhibition on collaboration between the Chinese and the French courts in the 18th century. Back to you, Jamie.
Yo Yang, thank you for that. Our correspondent Yo Yang in Beijing. A body has been found in the search for a toddler who went missing in the French Alps last year. 2.5-year-old Émile Solé disappeared while staying with his grandparents. He was last seen walking alone down a street. It's not known how he came to be there or how he died. Émile's parents spoke of their pain and their sorrow, and that the time had come for mourning and prayer. The Polish government has launched an investigation into the previous administration's use of controversial spyware. Pegasus was developed 8 years ago by an Israeli cyber arms firm. It can take control of a mobile phone, access messages and secretly record phone calls. Investigators will notify hacking victims and charges could be brought against former government officials. The UK's information watchdog is investigating the British Museum over claims that it's been overly secretive about Ethiopian artefacts. The 11 wood and stone tablets, which were looted by British soldiers in the 1800s, have never been on public display. They're considered to be so sacred that even the institution's trustees are forbidden from examining them. There have long been calls for their return. Japan has imposed measures to protect the authenticity of its whiskies. Distillers must use water sourced in Japan, and barrels must be stored in the country for at least 3 years in order to label a product as a genuine Japanese whiskey. Overseas demand has soared in recent years, with annual exports reaching around $370 million. The use of cannabis has been partially decriminalised in Germany. The change took effect at midnight, allowing over 18s to grow up to 3 marijuana plants for private use and carry up to 25 grams of cannabis in public. Our correspondent Peter Oliver reports.
At the stroke of midnight, it became legal. Crowds gathered at the iconic Brandenburg Gate to smoke in the change to the law, which means recreational cannabis use is now allowed in Germany.
It is a very important step for the future of legislation, to not be seen as a criminal if you have a joint instead of a beer.
I'm very happy and relieved. We are currently facing a lot of crises. The climate crisis, for example, and this is just a brief occasion to be happy.
This change in legislation comes with caveats. It's not going to be the legal cannabis free-for-all we've seen in some states in the US and in Canada. It's also going to differ from the coffee shop system that operates in the Netherlands. Over 18s can possess 25 grams of cannabis for personal use in public, 50 grams at home. There is a maximum of 3 plants per household for home growing. No smoking of cannabis near schools or sports centres or in pedestrian zones between 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. It will fall to official growers' associations or cannabis clubs to procure and distribute. No direct sales will be made, but upfront payments will see members receive their cannabis a month later. Campaigners say the new change is a mixed bag.
It is a first step, and we take it. We are not really happy, but we are happy about 180,000 cases less a year that were aimed at consumers and small amounts possession. This will be over in future. We love it. And the other point we love is that cannabis will be taken out of the narcotic law in Germany. That's also, we appreciate that. But in the rest, we are not very satisfied with this law, and it needs some calibration still. It's not perfect, it's not even good.
It has been a long road politically to get to this point. It was first put forward in 2021, and those in government and opposition tussled right up to the final moments it went through the German upper house. Health Minister Karl Lauterbach's argument is that this will stem the black market, while the opposition Conservatives have warned about the impact of drug legalization on lives.
Ich habe so viele Menschen gesehen.
I have seen so many people who have become so seriously ill, so badly damaged by drug abuse, that they have never found their way back into their lives. And I have spoken to so many doctors who have warned against going down this path.
Conservative leader Friedrich Merz has made reversing the cannabis legalization changes a campaign pledge ahead of next year's federal election in Germany. For now, at least, the change in the law is in effect. How long that lasts may well depend on how Germans vote in 2025. Peter Oliver, CGTN, Berlin.
The headlines again. Israeli forces leave Gaza's biggest hospital after a 2-week siege, with much of the Al-Shifa complex destroyed. Our other headlines: Israel's Prime Minister is under mounting pressure to resign as protesters seek the immediate release of hostages. And China's top officials hold talks with France's Foreign Minister in Beijing. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hello and welcome to Europe's weather forecast, starting with atmospheric circulation. A low vortex will bring lots of precipitations and big cooler feelings across many portions of the continent in the near future. For Tuesday and Wednesday, you could notice the rain chances stretching from Iberian Peninsula into France, the UK, Germany, Poland, all the way down to parts of the Balkans and almost entire portion of Italian Peninsula. For northwestern Russia, also rain chances. Meanwhile, there could be localized sleet or snowy conditions for parts of northern Europe. While when it comes to the maximum temperature, you could have a bit cooler feelings if you're living across much of Eastern Europe for next 2 days. You can see the readings will be going from lower or mid-20s all the way down to only around 15 degrees by Wednesday. For Central and Western Europe, the readings will stay in lower or mid-teens. And our business and travel outlook: by Wednesday could have the rain chances in London and Paris. Please keep your umbrellas handy. And down to Madrid, partly sunny sky 20 to 5. Down to Lisbon, a chance of light rainfall 19 to 12. When it comes to cities like Brussels, 17 to 8 light rainfall, but a bit cooler if you're living in Berlin and Warsaw, only 11 for daily highs.